we are about to start the session in 1 minute. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Gustavo Saltiel, and I am the World Bank Global Lead for Water Supply and Sanitation. I would like to welcome all of you to this World Water Week session on urban water management to achieve water security. I would like to start by thanking SIWI, also thanking Robert Briers and our Future Water for our partnership and jointly organizing this session, and also to thank all the speakers. So let me start by highlighting an important issue that hinders achieving water security, which is that the world is not on track to achieve universal access to water supply and sanitation, in particular, of course, in developing countries. And that is, we are not on track to achieve Sustainable Development Goal number 6. Today, we have 3.6 billion people without access to safely managed sanitation, 2 billion people without access to safely managed water supplies. As we can see in this picture, only 1 in 5 people in the lowest income countries has access to safely managed sanitation. That is, only 20% of the population of those low income countries has access to sanitation, and 1 in 3 has access to water supply, safe sanitation and safe water supply. And of course, the lowest values are in Africa and other low-income countries. In addition, in many cities of the developing world, where there is access to sanitation, there is no wastewater treatment at all. So wastewater's sewage is discharged into the water resources without any treatment. To revert this situation, it has been estimated that current investment levels in WASH, in water sanitation and hygiene, will need to increase 4 to 5 times by 2030 to move towards achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal. Most of the investments will need to happen at the urban level. That is, 42% of the total investment needs need to go to urban sanitation, and about 25% to urban water supply. So about 70% of the total investment needs will go to urban water supply and sanitation. That puts cities and urban areas at the forefront of the battle to achieve Sustainable Development Goal number 6. Now, let me connect for a minute access to water supply and sanitation and water security. In the definition, in the traditional UN water definition of water security, it mentions the capacity of a population to safeguard sustainable access. So access is there. But I also wanted to mention a recent publication of the United States government, what is called the Global Action Plan on Security. I mean, this is not only water security, security in general, that includes a consideration that having water security implies sustainable access to safe drinking water supply, sanitation, and hygiene. So it puts, again, access at the forefront, not only of water security, but security in general. So the link between access to water services and water security is clear. Now, in addition to the access issue, the cities around the world, and I made before the case for focusing on cities and urban areas. Cities around the world are facing compounded challenges of population growth, urbanization, climate change, of course, and economic growth as well. As a result of climate change, we know that there is too much, too little water, and too polluted sometimes. Many cities facing sea level rise, very high temperatures that generate an increase in demand, the reduction of the GDP of cities due to climate change, and also increased pollution, as I mentioned before. Now, all these forces, it has been estimated that will result in an increase of water demand in cities by at least 50 to 60% by the year 2050. So you have the need to serve more people, the need to address population growth, the need to mitigate climate change, and then how to deal with increased water demand. Now, I also would like to stress that the main instrument that countries put in place to address water issues, in particular water and sanitation services in cities, in urban areas, are the utilities. But also, it's important to note that in many developing countries, utilities are not performing well. So you have all these challenges that I mentioned before, and the main institutional instrument to address them, which are the utilities, are not performing well, providing in many cases poor services of poor quality, few cities in many countries delivering 24/7 water quality services, which deteriorates the confidence of the population in the service provider, and therefore they are not willing to pay the costs of the service that further deteriorate the performance of the utilities. Again, citing this recent document of the United States government on the Action Plan on Global Security, it highlights that water systems, this is not only the utilities, but includes the utilities, are not always well managed, inhibiting sustainable, reliable service delivery. So again, utilities are one of the main institutional instruments that countries put in place to deliver services, but the other institutions are not performing well in many developing countries either. As a result of all these forces, the institutions not effective, plus the challenges of climate change, urbanization, population growth, we have an increasing number of day zero events that started 6-7 years ago in Cape Town, but then continued in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, Chennai, and other places. But you see more and more of this. Unfortunately, recently here in the United States, we see many cities and regions in the western part of the country affected by these types of events, but also in France, in India, and all around the world. Now, to address these urban water challenges, including service delivery, the World Bank has designed an approach, a comprehensive approach to water management in cities that we say it is integrated, is green, resilient, and inclusive. And the reason why we are presenting it that way is because it aligns with the World Bank approach to development in developing countries in the recovery from COVID-19. The approach is called GREED, that stands for Green, Resilient, and Inclusive Development. In the water sector of the World Bank, we have the similar approach, and therefore, we promote integrated management of water at the city level that includes diversification of water supply options. Demand management is there, a green development that includes, of course, the mitigation and adaptation to climate change and improving environmental quality, but also the sustainable and circular use of water and wastewaters at the city level, resiliency with a forward-looking approach to water in cities, technological innovations, but also expanding the menu of options for water supply, and inclusive because it promotes a participatory approach to water management in cities. So demand management has many benefits, and it will be discussed in the session today. It includes promoting the better use of existing urban water supplies before plans and decisions are made to increase investments in infrastructure, contributing, of course, to climate mitigation and adaptation, because reducing water consumption reduces energy use and therefore greenhouse gas emissions, encourages water conservation during times of standard conditions and uncertainty, is cost-effective, that is cheaper than increasing water supply investments in costly infrastructure such as dams and desalination plants, and ensures equitable use of water by all users, human, and natural. And of course, the focus of the session today will be on the discussion of these points. The World Bank, to achieve urban water security, but also to manage urban water demand, has designed a few instruments. The first one, and instruments, tools, and reports. The first one of those is a recent report published recently that we call Travel Tariffs, Revisiting Water Pricing for Affordable and Sustainable Water Services, that of course discusses the state of the art of tariff setting in different parts of the world, where optimization, conservation, and reduction of demand and efficiency improvement is a key component. And this will be further discussed in the cases that will be presented later on. So I would like to focus now on three instruments: on utilities, on policies, institutions, and regulation, and circular economy. The utility of the future is a key instrument of the bank to transform utilities, to move towards a future-focused utility, and therefore the idea of the utility of the future, which provides reliable, safe, inclusive, transparent, and responsive water supply and sanitation services through best fit practices that allows the utility to operate in an efficient, resilient, innovative, and sustainable manner. You may see in the pyramid on the left that service to customers, service orientation, is the final objective of the utilities. But service to the customers is not only providing the water, but providing the water and sanitation services, but providing them with these characteristics. So the utility of the future is a key instrument that we are applying currently in 65 utilities around the world. The second is what we call policies, institutions, and regulation. We have developed a framework 5 years ago to address in an integrated manner, coordinated manner, these three dimensions: policies, institutions, and regulation, because they are intertwined. And we are applying this framework in 20 countries and drawing lessons from its application. Also, there is a renewed interest given emerging priorities of intergovernmental relations. In many developing countries, national governments play an important role in addressing water security, and therefore the relations, both fiscal and institutional, between national and subnational governments is critical. Financing and resilience are new dimensions. And this, as I mentioned, there is an emerging need for PIR, policies, institutions, and regulation. The day zero events that I mentioned before, many of them showed lack of proper planning and policies and incentives. Financial viability of service providers to address these challenges is also low. COVID-19 has shown the need for more focus on integrated approaches, and the fact that many people do not have access to water and sanitation services demonstrates that investments are not enough, also because countries are not able to execute the approved budgets for the sector. We have recently carried out an analysis of public expenditure reviews in many countries, demonstrated that some of them only execute 50% of the resources allocated to the water sector budget, let alone increasing the budget. So important institutional reforms are needed. And the final initiative that I wanted to show you is what we call WISER, Water in the Circular Economy and Resilience, that promotes a holistic approach to water in cities, including, I mentioned before, the services, delivering a resilient and inclusive services, designing out waste and pollution, reducing pollution and reusing resources, and regenerating natural systems through nature-based solutions and other types of solutions. Includes maximizing the use of existing infrastructure, reducing non-revenue water and demand, and increasing efficiency of all processes, including sources of water with different risk and cost profiles and vulnerabilities, nature-based solutions I may mention already. We're bringing all these tools and approaches under this integrated approach that we call WISER. And before concluding, I also wanted to show you the results of a recent survey carried out among policymakers in 86 countries and published by the Global Water Policy Report, Listening to National Water Leaders, in 2021, that demonstrates that PIR, policies, institutions, and regulation, is the missing link for resolving some of the chronic challenges undermining water security. Policymakers identified the fragmentation and lack of coordination of water institutions as the most significant problem that countries need to address, above investments, data, citizen participation, etc. So to conclude, demand management is critical to achieve urban water security and to address, of course, the challenges imposed by climate change, urbanization, economic and population growth. It's a key component of the World Bank integrated green, resilient, and inclusive approach to water management in cities, needs to be embedded in the policies, planning, utilities turnaround, financing, and regulatory incentive structures, and using the different tools and innovative approaches that will be presented in the session today. I would like to thank you for this opportunity and now pass the floor to Robert Briers from our Future Water and co-organizer of this session. Over to you, Robert.
Thank you, Gustavo. I'll just get this ready. Perfect. Thank you for the thorough overview of the topic. And my presentation will be on the role of demand management inside urban water security. So firstly, just I'd like to discuss that the overview is first discuss the key elements of achieving water security, urban water security, and then followed by demand management instruments available to achieve urban water security. So just a very brief overview of what does the term urban water security really mean. And it has three key elements to achieving it. So access to safe and sufficient drinking water. And that has to be at an affordable cost in order to meet basic needs, including sanitation and hygiene, as well as safeguarding health and well-being. It also means about protecting livelihoods, and that means protecting human rights and cultural and recreational values as well. And one of the critical things about urban water security is that nature plays a critical role and has equal value to humans as well. So urban water security also means preserving and protecting ecosystems. And that means allocating water and ensuring management systems are maintaining the health and functioning of ecosystems and the services they provide. So while we require water for ourselves, we also must have water for nature as well to ensure those ecosystem services are able to be provided for current and future generations. So demand management itself is about promoting the better use of existing urban water supplies before plans are made to increase supply. It promotes water conservation during times of both normal conditions as well as times of uncertainty. And we obviously know that the costs are a lot lower than just supply side management. And by costs, we're talking about economic, environmental, political costs. Also means about ensuring equitable use of water by all users. And that means both humans and natural again. So just going through the actual demand management instruments available to achieve water security. Obviously, pricing is the most common demand management tool available. It's the most common one that everyone thinks of at first. And we have, numerous types of water pricing tools available to promote conservation. And some cities around the world just have a flat rate based on property values, and that has absolutely no incentive to conserve water. You just receive a bill in the mail for just the general water service itself. And then we will start using different types of tools to promote conservation. We can start going through different types. For example, we have volumetric charges, and that's becoming quite a common where basically the volumetric rate is a charge based on the volume of water used at a constant rate. So $1 per 1,000 cubic liters, etc. And the bill just increases over time. One of the things is that increasing block tariff rates have also becoming quite widespread around the world. And with that contains two different pricing systems with two or more pre-specified blocks of water, with the price increasing with each successive block. And with that, it means that water suppliers can provide a social net for low-income households by providing a specific amount of water before the next price increases. So it's often seen as more of an equitable tariff rate. One of the most common forms of tariff rates, probably mainly in North America, is a two-part tariff system where there's a fixed component and a variable component. And the fixed component covers the supply side costs, the administration, the infrastructure, the future investments in the water supply system. And then with the variable part, that's a conservation part to encourage people to conserve the water itself. Also in North America, we often see seasonal rates where there's a higher charge during a peak season, and sometimes it could be 10% or 20% above the normal rate of the off-peak season. But before we can even start charging for water, we need to have meters, and often in many locations around the world, water meters are not even generally available. And there's usually two types of meters available, and we have basically the dumb version and the smart version. And the dumb ones are becoming, having the meter readings done via the cell phone networks, and that's becoming what's called automated meter reading. And that just sends out a signal of water consumption data to the water utility for processing, turning into a water bill essentially, using the 3G or 4G network. But however, these meters only provided daily or monthly accuracy, the actual resolution of the data. So many water utilities are turning to smart meters, which allow for two-way communication between the smart meter and the utility. And these smart meters provide high density data, so they can enable customers to see their water consumption down to even resolutions of 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, daily, monthly, weekly, yearly. And then they can detect leaks in the system. They may receive an automated leak detection signal on their phone, and they will get a text message to say that your consumption is higher than normal by about 10% or 20%. Therefore, you must have a leak in your system. And these smart meters are becoming, well, they're quite expensive to install, but they are becoming quite more readily available around the world as the costs come down. And basically, the smart meters, having that system in place, enables the active leak detection program to be in place. In many cities around the world, it is not uncommon for it to be losing up to 50% of your water supplies just by leaks alone. And this is known as unaccounted for water. And it's basically the total amount of water collected, treated, distributed, and then versus what the customer is actually receiving. A lot of these leaks are actually underground. They cannot be seen by just visually. So a lot of the common ways of doing this is to set alarm systems in the distribution system, so that if there's a leak or a pressure change, for example, then there's a leak in the system. Other way is using satellites and data now, drones, and even sniffer dogs in Australia, which can detect through the ground leaking pipes and things. So it doesn't have to always be high tech, but it can also just come down to a sniffer dog. In Perth, they have those types of dogs roaming around, sniffing water leaks. And then we turn to the regulations and ordinances. And in many cities around the world, they have water conservation temporary ordinances, and we know those as water bans during summer times, hose bans, and car washing bans. And then we also have the regulations which restrict certain water actual usage in total in buildings and new developments. So the water conservation ordinances come in the temporary version, are basically restrictions on non-essential non-residential uses. It could be on restrictions on commercial uses, for example, ban on using water for cooling purposes, etc. Meanwhile, permanent water restrictions include amendments to building codes, such as requiring installation of water-saving devices, for example, low-flow toilets in new developments. And of course, demand management means about developing alternative water supplies. And by that, we are talking about rainwater harvesting systems, on-site grey water harvesting systems, and other types of systems that enable water utilities to reduce the cost of treating potable water for non-potable uses. Water recycling systems can be developed for suburbs for various non-potable uses. They have, purple lines for washing cars or irrigation systems. And rainwater harvesting systems can be used for irrigation on commercial properties, a landscaping example, and that reduces the need for basically having potable water that's supplied by the municipality for non-potable uses. Basically, why are we treating top quality water that's for drinking purposes just to water grass and plants around a building? And then on-site non-potable reuse systems use grey water for multiple different uses. For example, toilet flushing, general washing and irrigation systems. A little less known part of demand management is the source water protection, protecting the source of the water itself before we start developing new supplies. And source water refers to sources of water that includes rivers, streams, lakes, reservoirs, springs, and groundwater. And these are the sources that provide drinking water and as well as a source of water for private wells. And protecting source water from contamination helps reduce treatment costs and may avoid or defer the need for complex treatment in the future. And source water protection includes a variety of actions and activities that aim to safeguard, maintain or improve the quality and or quantity of sources for drinking water in the contributing areas. And while there's basically, simple ways of protecting sources, for example, just fencing off wells, a range of nature-based solutions are available for source water protection. And these include riparian zone restorations, stream bank stabilizations, land protection and conservation easements, and best management practices for agricultural and forestry activities. In the household, demand management in the household itself, inside the actual home itself, it's common to use water efficiency labeling schemes. And labeling of appliances according to water efficiency is important in eliminating unsustainable products from the market. This is provided the labeling scheme is clear and comprehensible and identifies both the public and private benefits of conserving water. And people are more likely to respond to eco-labels if they actually match closely held personal beliefs, and that could be just a general feeling about nature itself, or a belief of needing to save money on the utility bills. So there's two types of labeling schemes commonly used around the world. The first one is the endorsement labels, and that indicates that a product has met a minimum standard. In the Blue Angel label in Germany, that is the case where a product has just met a basic standard of being efficient in this area. However, a lot of places around the world use rating labels, and these rate the product on a performance scale and or state of a product's actual water consumption or flow rate. So for example, washing machine may have 3 or 5 stars, and also may indicate how many liters per minute wash cycles are. This rating labels like this are common in Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore. Another less known demand management tool available is pilot and demonstration projects. And a lot of times water utilities face political constraints, might be from political leadership or might be from local government pressures. Examples might be from a national government that's not favourable to conservation. So pilot and demonstration projects can initiate change by showcasing new solutions, and that can be implemented on a broader scale. So water utilities and city governments can implement pilot projects in areas of high visibility to not only show their commitment to sustainable water resource management, but also provide showcase to the residents the benefits of these practices firsthand. So this might be an on-site grey water reuse system. For example, in Copenhagen, they were trialing this out a few years ago. Amsterdam's water net, the water utility of Amsterdam, has great rainwater harvesting systems in the building itself, in the water utilities headquarters. And this is actually going against almost national law, because these systems are not allowed to be really installed unless they have a health tick or Department of Health approves of it. So basically these systems are trying to push the politicians and get the conversation going about how the future water management could be in the city. And these pilot projects also provide an opportunity to educate the community while gathering support for future projects. So it's basically just driving conversation forward and trying to push politicians to finally approve a law change to allow grey water reuse, for example. And obviously education and awareness is a key part for any demand management strategy. So water efficiency programs in schools, such as repairing leaky toilets and installing water efficient taps, provide an opportunity for students to regard water conservation as the norm. And water efficiency initiatives can also become part of a school curricula, with students not only seeing water conservation in action, but also collecting data on the savings achieved. And students can also participate in field trips that include awareness of the water cycle, and for example, trips to water and wastewater treatment plants. Also, a lesser known tool in demand management is developing competition between water users. And water utilities can promote competition by among water users to achieve specific water consumption targets. So examples of competitions can include seeking public commitments from businesses to achieve a specific water saving target, or it could be promoting competition between the water users through the water bill itself. For example, restaurants could make a public pledge to reduce water consumption by, for example, 10%.
On it. Okay, I found this on the web forum. Students can also participate in.
Sorry, Siri is trying to chime into my presentation. So restaurants could also make a public pledge to reduce water consumption by, for example, 10%, with the successful ones receiving a public award. That's been done in New York City, where universities and restaurants have been making pledges, and then they get on a door, a special sign saying we are one of these restaurants that are participating in a 10% challenge. The water bill can also be used as a tool for competition between water users. For example, water bills could show a household's water consumption compared to the average household in a neighborhood or a city, province, or even state. So that was a brief overview of demand management tools available. And I'll pass over to Catherine, who will be talking about demand management and achieving water security in Sydney itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. That was a good intro into what I'm about to talk about as well. So just one moment. Excellent. So today I'm going to be talking about urban water security and demand management from a Sydney context. I just wanted to start with an acknowledgement of country. So in Australia, we do acknowledgements of country as a way to acknowledge and pay respect to First Nations people and traditional owners and ongoing custodians of the land. And today I'm speaking from Gadigal land and want to pay my respect to elders past and present. In terms of Sydney, the Sydney context, there's been a few key influences in terms of our journey in demand management and water conservation that I'll talk you through. But the key things to I guess keep in mind is that most of Sydney's water comes from dams. That Greater Sydney is quite vulnerable to drought, and we've had quite a number of experiences in drought, and that water conservation has been recognised as critical to securing Sydney's water supply. So I'll just run through those key pieces of the puzzle. And so yes, most of Sydney's water comes from dams. And for those who aren't familiar with Sydney, we've got a population of around 5.3 million people, are responsible for around 24% of Australia's GDP. we're quite a large, expansive city, and our traditional countries are Gadigal, Darug and Guringai. So that's the area of Sydney there. In terms of water supply, we have one desalination plant, which has a capacity of an average capacity of 250 megs a day. We also supply some recycled water at 35 meg, but our total water demand is much greater than that. And so you can see that the majority of that is met by 11 major dams and 9 water filtration plants. And so you can see through that picture that a lot of our water supply is not climate independent. And so we're very much reliant on rainfall, and as a consequence, we're quite vulnerable to drought, and there's limited groundwater options for Sydney in terms of drinking water supply. So if I show you this slide, this is a period over the last sort of 20 years, which is, we've seen 2 major droughts in Sydney. I grew up with the millennial drought, and that's very much part of my blood and sort of how I've grown up in consuming water and having, you know, buckets in the shower to save water and then use that on our gardens. But that millennial drought was a very long and slow drought. So we lost 50% of our dam capacity over 4 years, and so it was a really long drought. And we learned a lot of lessons from that. We got quite good at demand management, water conservation, implementing water efficient equipment and washing machines, and influencing a lot of policies for new developments. But then if you look at the more recent drought between 2017 and 2020, that was very, very quick. And so we had all these drought response plans and things in place. But what we learned was that, you know, storages can deplete more rapidly than previously observed, and that we had planned for, and had that severe drought sequence continued with the same intensity, the timely delivery of new supplies to avoid severe water restrictions or running out of water would have been at risk. So we were at risk of running out of water if that had continued on that trajectory and didn't have enough time to build anything. So it was a real, even though we'd had a lot of experience with drought, that was a wake-up call, and prompted the development of the Greater Sydney Water Strategy and the Greater Sydney Drought Response Plan, which I was involved with the development of the drought response plan and trying to learn key lessons from that 2017 to 2020 drought. And so we've got a stages of drought, a plan of different things to do at different stages, depending on dam levels, but also other indicators to sort of trigger that transition from one stage to another. But what's really important on this slide is in that normal operations, the call out there is that we need to implement water conservation programs, and then as you transition through drought, you ramp them up. So that's not something that you can just sort of start when you're in drought. It's something you need to continue throughout all periods and during normal operations. And so yes, water conservation is critical to securing our water supply. And you can see here that this is called out in the Greater Sydney Water Strategy and the Drought Response Plan as being quite critical in terms of reducing demand, but also making sure our water systems are sustainable and resilient. And so what you might find interesting, I love this graph, is that's looking at our total demand over time in Sydney. And you can see that, you know, even though our population has increased quite significantly over the last 30 years, that our total demand has gone down. And you can see the impact during, you know, periods of water restrictions has a big impact on our our water demand, but we've able to maintain those levels and keep them down. And it's been through, you know, a lot of the measures that Robert was talking about before. So behavior change and community engagement and education, but also that sort of regulatory requirements and changes to the way they build new developments, having the smart machines, washing machines that use less water, but that's had a real impact on our demand over time. So it can have a big impact in terms of the infrastructure you need to build to meet the demand. And this is just another slice at that sort of data, but this is per person over time. And you can see that, you know, between 1991 to 2022, that per person demand is continuing to decrease, you know, with a few ups and downs, particularly in the before the last drought in 2016, 2017. But that you know, it's a long game, so you need to continue maintaining these sort of programs and continue educating and implementing, and it has really long lasting benefits in terms of water demand. When we've got a water conservation program in Sydney Water, and I just wanted to call out that the program's not just about using less water. It's about using water more efficiently and more effectively. And so we want to have sustainable and efficient management of our resources. And, you know, as Robert said, it's about having water available for the environment and for other purposes as well. But having resilient and water smart communities and also enabling livability outcomes for the community. And so particularly in Western Sydney, which is, you know, it can be up to 5 degrees hotter than Eastern Sydney. It you know, with climate change, we're going to experience hotter summers and more extreme weather. And in Australia, heat is actually the biggest climate killer. So we get a number of people who die during heat waves, and so using water more effectively for greening and cooling and in the environment is really important. So conserving water is important, but our water conservation program is not just about using less water, it's about using water more effectively. We have water in our operating license. It's a requirement for us to maintain a water conservation program, which is really important, and it's good to have that as a hook to make sure that this program continues when you know, we've got at the moment it's quite wet at the moment, so it could be easy to shift focus, but we know, as I showed in those last graphs, that it's really important to continue working in this space. So it's an operating license requirement, and we have agreed with our economic regulator on a methodology which we call the economic level of water conservation. And that method says we should invest to save water if the social benefits are more than the social costs. And we look at lots of different, not just the water that we save, but other carbon costs, other sort of costs that we can include in that calculation. And as dam levels decrease, the benefits are greater. So we value water in our dams, and sort of that means you can ramp up these sort of programs as you progress into drought. But it's a way of valuing the water that you save, so that's a methodology we use to help decide whether these programs are economic or not. In our program, we have different focus areas. Robert spoke about a lot of these, but water efficiency, when we talk about efficiency, we're talking about customer efficiency. So how can we help our customers save water? Water leakage is on our end. So how do we reduce leakage of our pipes and our aging infrastructure? increasing water recycling, in improving community awareness and understanding of the need to save water and different ways to save water. And then the data and analytics, so that, like smart meters and other ways to help target different areas where we can save more water and inform our water behaviours. And then we've also got a pilot research and innovation program, which is looking at different technologies and different ways we can support and enable water savings across those focus areas. And so I'll just talk a bit very quickly around water efficiency and community awareness. We've got a number of different programs, and I can share in the chat, I'll share our latest water conservation program report, which kind of speaks to these in more details. But basically, these are subsidized water efficiency programs that support customers to save water. So there can be plumbing services, go in and help detect leaks, particularly for some of the big commercial industrial users. We can put online monitoring in and provide a service to them and to support them in how to, where there might be leaks, how they can save water, looking at overnight water usage. If there's water use overnight, that's sort of a good indicator that there's a leak in those commercial buildings. And so and targeting different sort of users, which could be childcare centres or schools, to support them with where we know that they tend to use a lot more water. So we've got a recent program with childcare centres and supporting them with more efficient washing machines. So we do a targeted based approach, or looking at different sectors and how we can help support them save water. And so I can share more information about those programs in the chat. We also have a community awareness program, so that sort of can be quite broad, but we can use advertising campaigns and targeting different community groups, which can work really well, works less well when dams are full. So you need to be clever about when to implement those sort of campaigns, and when the community is going to be open to that sort of messaging. We have school educational programs and engage with communities at a sort of grassroots level, which is quite effective in supporting that understanding of the water cycle and the value of water and how it's important to save water. But also there's lots of different other messaging and education through that avenue. And then there's also this the media coverage on saving water. So sort of Robert was talking about leak detection dogs, and Sydney Water, we've got a couple, but it's been a really good mechanism to talk to the community about how Sydney Water are trying to save water and reduce our leakage, and how it's important that we all pull our weight as well. So that's been a good talking point, as well as a good way of finding leaks, because they're pretty good at it. And so I just leave you with some enablers for success, or things that have been really important for Sydney Water on our journey of demand management and water conservation. Having it identified by government as critical is really been a big thing. And so you've got that strategic direction. It's in our the Greater Sydney Water Strategy, but it's also a regulatory requirement, which enables that consistent funding and support of water conservation measures. We are targeting effective water use, so it's not just about using less water, but supporting livability and greening cooling aspirations for the community. We need time to allow that behaviour change and building up water conservation capability within our own organisations. So there's real value in maintaining a diverse program, both in and out of drought, and that it's not really feasible to sort of try and turn these things on when we're in drought. It takes a lot of time to build that capability. And I think it's also really important to have that social capital with the community to ask them to save water. So you need to be able to demonstrate the efforts that you're making to reduce your leakage and increasing recycling, to then be able to ask the community to pull their weight as well. So that, you know, the leak detection dogs is a really good example of how we've been able to have that conversation in a more collaborative, like, this is what we're doing, come and walk with us and join us on the journey. So yes, thank you very much. And I'll hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you. I think I'm the next speaker. I'm going to share my presentation. So thank you very much. You know, it's always very enlightening to see water authority and agency from Western country showing the way. I used to work in development. I'm now freelance, but it's a big problem for our developing member country to deal with the problem of water security, and urban water demand management is new for many of those borrowing member country of the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and other regional banks. So the first thing is that I look at this from a climate finance perspective, urban water demand management. So we need urban water demand management to achieve water security. And I'm going to steal some word from World Bank, but it was said that water is to adaptation, what energy is to mitigation. And in a sense, the Green Climate Fund, when you do a portfolio analysis of the water sector, 84% of the water project finance are adaptation projects, and 16% are cross-cutting. So there is basically in climate finance, in general, very few projects that are, I will say, finance for mitigation. And my experience with both World Bank and Asian Development Bank for nearly 20 years show that you know, during my time, most of the investment was going toward production and not enough going toward distribution. So therefore, and on top of this, when you see that when the World Bank or Asian Development Bank or any of those international financing institutions invest in a water project, when the construction is finished and the water company, public or private, is left to manage the new asset, that's basically the time where you close the project and you leave. So I was very pleased to see Gustavo pushing for those measures that support the operation of the water company. So basically, I'm not going to repeat what the other speakers have said, but any water saving in water demand management basically save greenhouse gas emission, and this is good for climate mitigation. On top of this energy saving, you reduce the volume of wastewater, you have less water to produce, less water to distribute, and most importantly, from a financing perspective, you can delay capital expenditure for water resource development. So if you can gain a couple of years, 5 years, in order to delay those additional water resource that are capital intensive type of project, so much the better for the water tariff. And I'm going to explain why. I'm trying to be a bit provocative. Basically, you know, always this discussion between public and private sector, frankly, it doesn't matter. What is important is that the water company is well run. And some public company have a lot of respect, can do that very well. Now, having said that, there is a shortfall of public finance, and we all know that there is not enough public money to finance all the requirements that Gustavo was talking about in terms of investment for water infrastructure, for sanitation, and even pre-financing water conservation, which are not very expensive compared to the infrastructure cost, but still require some money. So basically, we need the end game is how can we attract private and commercial funding into infrastructure sector in general and water and sanitation sector in particular. We also don't always think in terms of finance, but we need private sector because some skills come from the private sector. We have a lot of innovation coming, smart tool. The International Water Association coined the word climate smart utilities. This expertise is very new and is easier to get in the private sector than in the public sector. And increasing institutional resilience, whether it's from a public side or private side, we basically need the buy-in from the water user. The water user are the main stakeholder in the water project, and they have a say. So we basically need financial sustainability, first to interest the private sector, and second to build institutional resilience, means to build a very efficient and performant operation. And I used to say that happiness is positive cash flow, and that's very true for a water company. If you have shortfall of income for any reason, it becomes very difficult for you to do your daily operation and maintenance and basically plan for capital expenditure, replacement of equipment. So financial sustainability to me is the first thing that need to be achieved. And I'm not a finance person, I'm an engineer. So it's an engineer telling you this. So there is a couple of tools available. The stakeholder on the right are the water user. Then there is the operator under the name Climate Smart Utility. There is the regulator or whoever has an oversight role. And there is the financier, international, local, public, or private. And basically, that's where you finance urban water demand management, and somebody needs to pay for it. When I had a local government representative telling me, I want water to be free, I say, well, it's not free. Somebody is paying for it. You know, either you do it through direct charge, which is the best practice way of doing it, either you do it through indirect charge, basically through fiscal transfer. So let's look at direct charge. Lifeline tariff, block tariff, Robert talked about it. The real problem from a water user perspective is the connection cost. It's a barrier to access the service. Poor people have been very conveniently used that we cannot increase tariff because the poor people cannot pay for it. The alternative cost of getting water from when you're a poor person or vulnerable group is much more expensive than the tap water that will come. And this vulnerable group will adjust their water consumption to what they can offer, but it's very expensive and it's unsafe and unreliable to get water from the river, from truck service. Is much better to do it through a water company, through the tap, and the connection cost is the real barrier. So I will say in terms of I work a lot in Vietnam, and Vietnam was blessed because in the legal framework, the connection cost was to be borne by the water company. And that gives a certain advantage. The water company owns the meter. They have a say in what meter they want to buy. They can buy a dump meter of a good quality, or they can buy a smart meter. But if the water user is the owner of the meter, then you have a lot of losses, water losses coming because of this different use of the meter. And in those countries, the calibration, the regulation is not always as good as it can be. On block tariff, in order also to be a bit provocative, I would say that what I would like is that if you reach the highest block tariff, you should pay 100% of your bill on the highest tariff. Why do you get subsidy from the first block, the second block, or the third block? So that's something I've tried to push unsuccessfully. And then lifeline tariff, yes, we need lifeline tariff, but I always wonder, why do we impose this on the water company? There is social services in order to do that. When you go to buy petrol, you're not saying I'm a vulnerable group and you should give me petrol cheaper. A water company, a core business is to produce and distribute water. They should be, in my opinion, isolated from this social service, social security duty. The local government is there for that. There is always in those cities and in the province for rural area a social service department that deal with that. And I feel this imposition on the utility company is sometimes a bit counterproductive, because the utility company has so many things to do and to resolve that this is basically one added burden that is put on the water company. Now, on the indirect charge, we basically, I call it shadow tariff, capex subsidy, whatever subsidy we have, they should be targeted. We should know where the subsidies are going, and they should be limited in time. That's why I say time bound. Then you have rebate fund, carbon fund. I'm going to talk about it, all those special funds that can basically help urban water demand management. And Sydney Water was basically showing a very good example. And guarantee, basically to look at hidden liability. And I will talk a little bit more about this later. So without duplicating what others have been saying, I'm going to go quickly through this slide, but basically we have possibility to do demand management at the water resource, raw water transmission level. And like I said, the end game is to delay large capex investment to develop water resources that are very capital intensive, cost a lot of money, and has to be financed by the public sector. It reduces greenhouse gas emission and increase water security, which is important. The water production, well, internal water loss and energy consumption, and I would say build a case that water and energy should be looked at it together. After all, energy is, I would say, at least 1/3, most often 50% of the total operating cost of a water company. So if you can kill two birds with one stone by doing water demand management, you can also do energy saving. And on the water distribution, I'm not going to go into detail, but Robert talked about it, Sydney Water also. And basically, the end game is we want to increase the performance, the efficiency of the service delivery for the user. Let's not forget that this is a service business. We're basically delivering a service to people. It's not about only infrastructure. It's about, at the end of the day, a service. And if we can do better as a public service, that's good. So we have a few barriers to look at. And most climate smart utilities don't implement urban water demand management. I talk about it. There is in developing member country of World Bank and the International Financing Institution, the capacity of the utility company. Very poor capacity, very good people, but they don't know where to start. And I had some project where I was scratching my head and said, okay, what do we fix first? Do we fix the finance? Do we fix the production? Do we fix the distribution? It's a bit overwhelming. Then there is the regulator, and most often you don't have a regulator. So you have to work through regulation by contract. It's not ideal, but you need something. And then you have the user perspective. And I remember working in one country where basically they were, I was telling them that we should implement customer service. And he said, okay, what is this? And he said, well, you know, we send them a bill every month. So that's not what it is. We need to take care of the user. And what Robert was talking about, the advantage of smart meter, providing information to the water user on the pattern of the water consumption is very important so that we can do water conservation and demand water management. So we need incentive, we need access to finance, and a lack of understanding of the water sector from the regulator, from the utility, and from the user. There is also a perceived high risk for the water sector, but not for energy. So we can introduce de-risking, which is a fancy word to say, okay, we are going to guarantee some investment, and some international financing institution agree to take first loss in case something go wrong, or the project financial internal rate of return is not as good as it was designed. We can mobilize blended financing from private and commercial. All the international financing institutions are working on that. And we have to lower transaction costs. So anything we can do to standardize contract for private sector participation, for regulator is very good. And the World Bank is doing a fantastic job with this. So I look at financing urban water demand management from different perspectives. So from a user perspective, what can I do? I can purchase efficient water feature if there is some indication in some country. Yes, in Australia, in New Zealand, in US, in Japan, in South Korea, you have those star rating system for energy, equipment, and also for water feature. But in most countries, you don't. So basically work with the regulator, work with some line ministry in order to implement those programs. They're not very expensive. Some bilateral countries are willing to finance. Monitor water consumption. This is exactly what Robert was saying. And always go for advocacy, public awareness campaign. Why is it important to do water conservation? Also, we talk about water reuse, and I call the YAT factor, acceptance of water reuse. You have the new brew in Singapore, which is a beer that is made out of recycled wastewater. And this was done as a marketing ploy in order to build more acceptance from the population. And also pressure group from the water user to increase the level of service. So from a regulator perspective, basically they can work on taxation in order to incentivize water conservation, implement those water feature rebate through the water tariff or through the local tax. They can set up special fund. They can promote public-private partnership and private sector participation. They can work on national programs for advocacy. We talk about the water saving feature rating. They can push for targeted subsidy if they need a bit of time to build financial sustainability, and they can enforce block tariff in order to incentivize water conservation for people. So I'm going to skip this slide, but basically say, if you're a private company, you should have full control of what you are trying to do in order to operate and maintain, and that is also true. And regulation, basically you are reporting key results against your business plan. I'm not saying that the water company, public or private, should have a free lunch, but they basically have to report against an agreed and approved business plan. It can be 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you pick and choose. And increase MERV, which is monitoring and evaluation, reporting and verification, as well as disseminate the result. Now, from the operator perspective, basically, the capital expenditure can increase smart water investment in order to have more saving, water and energy saving. I like to combine both, as well as working on the operating expense to improve the efficiency and the performance of the service, and communicate in order to strengthen the customer service. I'm going to pass because I see that time is passing on the risk, but this is the usual suspect from commercial, political, regulatory, financing, ESG, and reputational. Different financing vehicle, PPP. I have a slide after. I will go into more detail. Blended finance, we talk about it. I mentioned first loss risk sharing that can be applied to demand management, and also green, water, or blue, and climate bond. So basically additional financing instrument that can be applied to the sector. Let's not forget that water demand management is not like infrastructure. Infrastructure, you want long-term financing. But for demand management, you can have short-term financing because the payback of the investment can be less than 5 years, most often less than 3 years, and sometimes within 1 year. So this is basically different type of model. I think everybody here knows that for any of those contracts can include demand management clause, and it's up to the regulator to enforce those, and the international financing institution acting as the big brother, as the advisor of those regulators, have a major role to play. I'm going to skip this one and work on the next two. So basically, this was promoted by the government of Netherlands within the frame of the Water Operator Partnership. So the Netherlands were financing technical assistance in order to establish and define the baseline. And then once the baseline has been defined and agreed, issue a performance-based contract that is output-based and can be structured either as a public-private partnership or basically asking the public utility that is commercially autonomous to implement the output-based contract. Now, this is a concessive leasehold, which is between the leasehold where there is little financing coming from the private company and the concession model where all the financing comes from the private company. But basically, it looks complicated, but it's very simple. You have an international financing institution in green on top left with public capital that can give a sovereign loan, standby loan, or guarantee of first loss through the Ministry of Finance. And this is basically given through the proper channel to the water utility that own the long-term asset. I mean, the pipe, the valves. And then you have a private company that own the short-term asset, expertise, smart meter, smart system, leak detection, and equipment, you name it. So they have a right of use of the asset, and they have a lease or debt or concession fee. And basically, they have a guarantee from the international financing institution, and they can basically have additional financing from a private and commercial capital or from the international financing institution through their private window. IFC for the World Bank, Private Sector Operation Department for Asian Development Bank. Now,
Hubert,
yep.
Sorry, you will need to wrap up soon.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is a slide from Castalia and your predecessor, Gustavo, Bill Kingdom, basically trying to, and we were discussing this with the Green Climate Fund, trying to see how we can merge energy efficiency and non-revenue water and develop some models. So basically Green Climate Fund and IFC are working on this. And in conclusion, basically raising tariff is always give the most immediate result to support water conservation. Carbon tax is not yet there, but will come. Carbon is too low, carbon credit, but at some stage it will have to come. Revolving fund is a tool that can be done to finance water tariff rebate and decrease water consumption. Commercial bank can run the fund. It can be replenished through the donor and documented experience. And last but not least, managed aquifer research promoted by the institutionalized in Netherlands, basically where treated effluent reuse is basically used for water conservation and have a very high potential. So thank you very much, and sorry for taking a bit too long.
Thank you, Hubert. Good afternoon, good evening, and greetings from Manila, Philippines. So I have the task of putting together the key messages of the previous presentations and craft a way forward to urban water demand management. And we know that this is a very relatable topic, especially now when all over the world, places are experiencing extreme weather conditions, extreme drought, flooding events, and the risk of water security of cities. And Gustavo mentioned the numbers earlier, that 70% of the population by 2050, or about 10 billion people, will be living in urban centers, and demand will increase by 50 to 60%. And this will be further exacerbated by climate change, which will put 4 billion people living in cities at risk of water stress and 1.6 billion at risk of flooding, and hundreds of cities at risk of rising waters and storm surges. So just to give you an example of cities development and the demand on water, this is Bonifacio Global City in Metro Manila. This was developed in 1997 as part of the transformation of vast military land in Metro Manila. So back in 2005, water demand or build volume in the city was 5 million liters per day. And over 16 or 17 years, demand has now risen to 22 million liters per day. And this city also has to face a lot of typhoons, as Metro Manila encounters a lot of typhoons throughout the year. So it has to be very resilient, as well as for resilience to earthquakes. So how then do you secure a city like Bonifacio Global City? You saw this before in Gustavo's presentation, the vision for water secure cities, where water services, water supply, water use are integrated, green, resilient, and inclusive. And this is not talk only about water supply, but talks about water resources, talks about wastewater management, flood management, and everything that has to do with sustainable use of water resources. And part of looking at the water secure cities is, or the backbone is the integrated urban water management. And there are many options to do this. And you've seen some of the examples earlier. We can look at leisure-based solutions, flood management, pollution control. But in this particular discussion, we've been looking at demand management. And this was also mentioned by Robert, the difference between the traditional approach for urban water management and the IUWM approach. So traditionally, hydrologists, water resource engineers would look at increasing supply for managing urban demand. So this would be adding additional surface water sources, increasing the intakes, developing different systems like desalination, increasing reservoirs, constructing new treatment plants, and expanding the centralized network. The IUWM approach looks at the demand side, and not the supply side. And in the demand side, we look at diversifying and preserving supply, improving efficiency, and managing demand. So diversifying and preserving supplies would look at storage, groundwater recharge, catchment management, stormwater capture, and more of decentralized local distributions to extend coverage. And for improving efficiency, this is where utilities come in to ensure that the existing assets are maintained and rehabilitated, and there's reduction of NRW, and essentially optimizing the use of the water treatment plant, existing water treatment plant capacities. And managing demand means for non-potable uses, essentially using, aside from piped water, fit for purpose water, and then using other sources of supply like rainwater, gray water, recycling. Catherine talked about information education campaign on water conservation, and as well as the policies on tariffs and fees, which Hubert, Robert talked about earlier as well. So again, the difference between the approach of the traditional water supply management as well is the IUWM looks at the demand side, controlling and managing the demand side. So the way forward is to look at, in broad strokes, the four crucial elements to urban water demand management. Policy and regulation would provide the incentives, would provide the enabling environment to make this possible. Utilities are at the forefront of urban water demand management, as shown by Catherine and Sydney Water. The private sector, because of igniting knowledge sharing and driving as well technology and innovation. So we'll take a look at each of these crucial elements, starting from policy and regulation. And a lot of these were discussed by Robert and also Catherine. We look at policies on water pricing, like the block water tariff, which promotes water conservation. incentives for utilities, for example, to reduce non-revenue water and private companies to go towards green buildings, policies on water recycling, storm water management, rainwater harvesting. And just this morning, we had this session on wastewater reuse, treated sewage effluent reuse for the Philippines, involving different policymakers. So very interesting discussion as we move forward on sewage effluent reuse. And it has been mentioned, the advocacy, the education, and awareness on water conservation, which engages stakeholders towards conservation and efficient water use. And financing all of these through, for example, targeted subsidies, even tax incentives. And we talked about water efficiency labeling, the fixtures, the appliances, and incentivizing the use of all these to conserve water use. So, for example, the impact of policy and regulation in Zaragoza, Spain. Over the years, Zaragoza was able to reduce the per capita consumption from 180 liters per day in 1980 to around 94 in 2018. And this was done through years of developing a water-saving culture through awareness campaigns, standardizing good practices, getting commitments from stakeholders, both public and private, to reduce consumption, water pricing incentives, and massive leakage reduction. So this is very similar to the chart shown by Catherine on Sydney, where liters per capita per day were reduced significantly over years. And in the World Bank, we have this tool, which was also shown by Gustavo, essentially for a wiser approach to water use, going back to a circular economy, and essentially you can see the inner circle, we get supply from nature, we try to recover as much water, energy, nutrients for the city, the industries, and agriculture, and restore back to the nature whatever we put back. So this is the wiser approach that is developed by the World Bank. It's a tool for cities, it's a tool for utilities to look at water circularity and ensuring sustainable use of water resources. And the second is the role of utilities. Now, Sydney Water is a good example. Earlier, Sydney Water led the demand management in Sydney, and they're at the forefront of this efforts because they provide technical solutions on a massive scale, leak reduction, pressure management, network solutions, wastewater reuse, and they also work with commercial solutions, so key accounts management, managing illegal connections, and directly engaging customers on education awareness, and students, it was mentioned, working with private property developers and private companies to monitor their water use, to reduce their consumption, essentially to control or make efficient the consumption of water. So in an additional example on the role of utilities, I'd like to show you the example of Metro Manila, where you have two private concessionaires, Manila Water Company for the East Zone and Maynilad Water for the West Zone. The numbers show the combined performance from 1997 to 2021. We have increased the coverage from around 5 million to 17 million, coverage from 48 to 94%, and then increases in sewer and sanitation coverage. But the bigger accomplishment is the reduction of non-revenue water from 61 to 30% combined. Now, looking at the example of Manila Water, for instance, Manila Water is the East Zone concessionaire of Metro Manila. In 1997, 26% of the customers of Manila Water had 24 hours water availability. So the rest would have intermittent supply. And then in 2021, almost 100%, 99% of customers had 24-hour availability. And during this period, there was no major dam, no major water supply or water source developed. It was really from non-revenue water savings, which allowed this expansion and improvement of service. Because from 63% in 1997, non-revenue water was reduced to 15%. So over the years, this would be roughly covering around 700 million liters per day saved from non-revenue water. So again, there was no major water source developed throughout this period, but the savings from NRW were used to supply water and improve services and expand service coverage. I'd like to again mention the World Bank tool for utilities, and which could help ignite transformation of utilities. It was mentioned that a lot of utilities are exhibiting subpar performance. We have a tool, it's now being used in 24 countries, 65 utilities all over the world. This is called the Utility of the Future tool. It's a diagnostic and a planning tool, which allows utilities to look at the past performance, maturity, challenging the present, and having a future perspective, so that it's not just looking at the current performance, but this would look at where it wants to go, for instance, on its essential processes in commercial management, technical, and so on, as well as the future focused innovation, inclusion, market orientation, and resilience. So this is a tool for planning that utilities can use to ignite transformation in their performance. And this is publicly available as a tool for utilities. Now, the third one is the private sector. And we look at the private sector, aside from the financing that Hubert mentioned earlier, we look at the private sector as igniting knowledge sharing, capacity building, and providing the expertise. So this is just a snapshot of, again, the concessionaires in Manila, which have been involved in a lot of trainings and a lot of knowledge exchange, not just within the Philippines, but across the globe as well for My Needed Water Academy. We also look at the private sector in terms of its role in driving technology and innovation. Now, there was mention about the use of smart water meters to allow households to see their water consumption and manage their own water consumption. These are green buildings for less water and power demand, and the water saving appliances and fixtures, which are very important to water conservation. And so all these technologies and innovation of remote O&M, allowing remote network management as well. These are all examples of how technology and innovation could assist in managing our water demand in cities. So again, just to summarize, the 4 key items moving forward to look at towards urban water demand management would be looking at policy and regulation to ensure that the practices are sustainable and maintained over time, as Catherine mentioned. The utilities like Sydney Water, like Manila Water, My Needed Water, which have shown the way forward, and the private sector for the knowledge and the technology and innovation. So these are the 4 key areas to move forward towards urban water management. And this is all integrated into hopefully a water secure cities vision for integrated urban water management, to have this integrated, green, resilient, inclusive use of water resources in cities. So yes, that summarizes the whole session, and we thank you for joining us. Thank you very much.